Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a beautiful, beautiful day to celebrate Blayne. So thank you for being here on behalf of the entire family. I want you to know it is a really, a sincere gift, your presence here today to help celebrate Blayne and celebrate one another, celebrate the work that he's done, his life, and just being together. So today, as part of the program, we're going to hear 8 different folks that are going to come up and share a eulogy. They're going to share memories about Blayne. They're going to share stories. They're going to make us laugh, probably make us cry a little bit. But in doing so, I wanted to first just give some different kind of thoughts, some context to today. And so if you look back at historic ancient Christianity, that really around like the Scotland and Ireland areas, in Celtic Christianity, they talked about something called a thin place. And a thin place is really, it's a time, it's a place where the veil between heaven and earth is unusually thin. It's a real sacred space where we can feel God's presence. And I want to really acknowledge that today is a thin place. Today's a place where we come before the Lord to celebrate Blayne's life with really heavy hearts and with also wonderful memories. And this is a real thin and sacred space. So if you think about times when you hear like a wonderful song that just speaks deeply to your heart, or you see something of beauty, or you see a beautiful place, you have a conversation, and that space just really touches your heart in a deep way. That's because the presence of the Lord is there and you're getting a sense of eternity. And I really hope that today is that for us, because I feel like the Lord has a message for each one of us today. And as I think about the kingdom of God, I think about, of course, the eternal kingdom, but I also think about how the kingdom of God is present with us here today, basically the heart of the Father. And I can't help but think about a verse that reminds me of Blayne. And it's Micah 6:8. And the question was asked, Lord, what do you require of us? And he said, this is what I ask. For you to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before God. Doesn't that remind you of Blayne? You know, when we think, some of the things that I was thinking of when I think about Blayne are his kindness, his authenticity of how real he was, how he loved community, his humility, how he was nurturing, everything from gardening to nurturing young artists, to nurturing community, to nurturing special places where people could be creative and really show their God-given talents. And how he was a peacemaker. And these attributes reveal the heart of the Father. And they're beautiful. And so as we are in this sacred space together today, I want you to try something with me. If you're not comfortable, don't worry about it at all. But it's something that is called palms down and palms up. And it's just a little practice. It's just a visible expression of what we're asking for this time together within our hearts. And so if you want to, it's going to be a prayer. And again, if you want to, don't feel like you need to, but start like this. Extend your hands out like this and extend them down, facing down. And just pray with me. Father, we thank you for the life of Blayne. We thank you for this community. And we thank you for this celebration today and the weather you've given us. But Lord, we come before you with this tension of really celebrating the wonderful memories in the life of Blayne, but just with heavy hearts. Lord, we weren't ready to say goodbye. It seems like his life shouldn't have ended this soon. And so, Father, we come before you today. You know the burdens on our hearts. You know the things that weigh us down, the struggles, the pain, the fear, the anxiety, just the things that just cause us to lose sleep at night or just weigh heavy on our hearts. And so, Lord, we symbolically, with hands down, give those to you right now. We just release those. We drop those to you. And in turn, now, if you will, audience, if you'll turn your palms up. And so, Lord, having placed just the raw parts of our heart in your hands, in your loving hands, we now turn our palms up. And we receive this sacred time together. We receive this time just to be together. We receive the words that are going to be shared. We receive one another's presence. And most of all, we receive your presence. Father, Psalm 34:18 says that you are close to the brokenhearted. And we come before you with broken hearts today, but with hopeful hearts. And so with palms up, we ask that you would fill these hurting places in our lives, Lord. Fill those places in us, and where there's fear, I pray you give us faith. Where there is doubt, Lord, please show some clarity. And today, fill our hearts with a hope, both now and everlasting, as we celebrate Blayne, as we spend this time together. So we receive the gift of your presence and one another with grateful hearts. Amen. Thanks for doing that with me. So we're going to have 8 different folks come up and share today. And so what we'll do, we'll start with Michael. And then after Michael's done, then you can step on down. We're going to come up and down this side. And then Audrey will come up, and then we'll come going, we'll kind of follow like that. And then I'll close this out in a little bit. So thanks, Michael.
Deep breath. I wrote that for myself first. Let me start out by saying what an honor it is to be asked to share some love today for Blayne, a man who meant so very much to all of us, and someone who I will always have and always will consider family, my brother Blayne. I'm truly eternally grateful for his presence in my life. And honestly, I'm in a lot of emotional pain, processing grief, still shocked, still trying to make sense out of our tragic loss, and very, very slowly releasing emotions and practicing that difficult principle of acceptance. With that said, I'm going to do my damnedest today to hold it together and try to speak from my heart. I'm going to tell some brief stories about love and about loss. When I first met Blayne a decade or so ago, my inner rebellious teenager immediately recognized that same inner rebellious teenager in Blayne. You may have one of these in you, that part of your original operating system that defaults to screw you, screw them, everything is BS. He was one of me. He was one of us, if you have that part of you. So that part of me and that part of Blayne hugged it out quick and got straight to work. We loved hanging out on Tuesdays. Last October, Blayne had told me that he believed our co-authored book should be entitled Any Given Tuesday. And while I would love to go into more detail about our Tuesday antics and the content of this non-existent book, as with all things with Blayne, it is all protected by attorney-client privilege. And besides the rebel, my lifelong ambition to be successful and my desire to do important, meaningful work also recognize these same ambitions and attributes within Blayne. I truly admired this about him. He inspired me. He inspired us to do meaningful, important work together. And Blayne was hyper-competitive, as am I. Before we sort of segued our friendship to any business deals, Blayne had told me a cautionary tale, a prophecy about how the French national soccer team, Coach Raymond Domenech, would not allow Scorpions, him, and Leo's me on the same soccer team. Astrology. Yes, Blayne was our cosmic cowboy. And now, fortunately or unfortunately, it is way more fun to screw off like rebellious teenagers than it is to do important work. This would prove to be the signature of most all of our business ventures. Indeed, Blaine and I became astonishingly, this is the lost part, Blaine and I became astonishingly sensational at losing money together. Do 210. Snowball, the electronic music festival. Maverick Music Festival. Yes. We lost at darts together. We were booed off stage at karaoke, even with Blayne running falsetto on Tiny Dancer. We even became next level at losing at pickleball together. Back in November, we met up with my wife Cassie and our friend Eric Hankin to play some doubles. Eric had to catch a flight. Blayne, me, and my wife played together, and Blayne and I naturally decided to play against my wife, all by her lonesome. Needless to say, she beat us both by herself. Immediately afterwards, Blayne and I scampered off to lunch, huffing and puffing like we'd just run a marathon. And naturally, we mentioned not a single word of this demoralizing defeat during our entire meal together. One of my warmest memories of Blayne happened in Missouri. My company had bought a publication in St. Louis, and it was hemorrhaging money. So I flew my brother Blayne up to St. Louis for moral support. We sat day after day analyzing the situation, building a strategic plan together, interviewing new hires together. But most importantly, during this time, he got the opportunity to visit his boyhood home in the Central West End, which I know meant the world to him. Most admirably to me was that Blayne really did not give an F of what either people thought about him. He was an absolute Jedi master of this. I would pick him up to attend some of my work events, and he would wear outfits that I don't even think qualified as pajamas. So while I was trying to master my own self-consciousness and imposter syndrome, he would be perfectly peaceful in his own skin. It was truly his superpower. It took me over a month to look at my final text thread with Blayne, but our conversation was so beautifully Blayne, and it sort of encapsulated our entire relationship. Blayne had, without any context, sent me some 80s era photos of Peter Cetera. I know, Peter Cetera. And we debated at length about whether Peter Cetera's dangling earring was an actual piercing or whether the heavily mascaraed Peter Cetera was wearing a clip-on to appeal to the MTV generation of the 80s. And after an embarrassing amount of back and forth, Blayne won this debate by unearthing a very recent photo of a red-faced and grizzled Peter Cetera, alas, donning a lovely brass hoop. It's been said that the true measure of a person is how they love. Blayne lived big, Blayne hugged big, Blayne laughed big. That laugh, let us never forget that laugh. And yes, Blayne loved big. Thank you.
I wish I knew every single one of you before today, because if you love Blayne, I know you have some exceptional stories to tell, and I want to know them. You see, I only got to know Blayne, like so many of my brothers and sisters, with the National Independent Venue Association in 2020, when the world turned upside down, and a couple of dozen of us, strangers, came on this new thing called Zoom, and we're all scared and desperate and anxious. Well, at least I was. As we peered at each other in little triangles on our computers, our collective question that brought us together was, how on earth were we going to survive this, and how were our music venues going to survive a historic pandemic and shutdown? We had no choice but to fight for venues across the country and fight for each other. We had no right to think we could do it, but thanks to Blayne, we pulled off the unimaginable. This small group of warriors banded together and bonded together. And I would like my Neva brothers and sisters to stand for a moment, because I want you to know that we were all strangers in 2020, and we've come from more than 20 states to be here with you all today, because there's no other place we could be. I stand here certain that had it not been for Blayne and his Herculean efforts, our venues could have folded, our communities would have been devastated, our employees would have had no place to return, and artists would have lost the stages that they grace to share their art. Make us dance, allow us to have our real lives left at the front door, and escape to the places that make our hearts beat faster. With Blayne's efforts, we were able to save our stages, securing the largest grant in the arts in the US history, $16 billion. And that ensured that more than 5,000 music venues could survive. Every state in the nation has venues like the Mix that Blayne helped save. His legacy will go on for generations. Blayne was our stealth but mighty warrior. I say stealth because on the Zooms, he never had his camera on. I don't know how many months it was that I knew what the heck he looked like, and I wish he had it on sooner because I love red hair so much. I also say stealth because he didn't squawk a lot. He just went to work unceasingly telling our story to legislators who could make a difference. Even though we were the world's biggest underdog, Blayne never stopped coming up with creative ideas on how we could win, and made it his mission to keep us all motivated on the down days, sharing words of support, wisdom, humor, absurdity, and friendship. And I know. And we needed all of that as the days were long and dark and frightening. He'd end an email outlining new strategic tactics with, and I am quoting, "You all are the best. Rest up. Next week, we're blowing this thing up." Or, "This is real momentum. We can spawn into exponential growth as long as we continue forward, focused like the collective juggernaut we are." Who talks like that? Blayne. Or, "Let's keep this energy booming, exalting our allies along the way." Who talks like that? Blayne. Or he'd sign off by simply saying, "Because we are one, all love." That one is my favorite. Because we are one, all love. He built bridges and inspired. He made everyone want to say yes, and he made us all feel loved. Blayne's impact goes beyond each individual music venue he helped save. It meant tens of thousands of employees, from guitar techs to bartenders to security staff to sound and light engineers, could return to work. And let's talk about all the artists that, because of what Blayne helped secure, were able to get back on their buses and in their vans and take our stages, thereby being able to make their living and giving us all a reason to be together, to share the thing we live for, the live music experience. It's our family, it's our church, it's what keeps us together, and it's what keeps us going. My brother Blayne thought and wrote like a poet, a man who could talk to people in all walks of life and find commonality with them, connect with them, understand them, help them to better understand themselves. And I don't have to tell you this, but gosh, he was so smart and witty and funny and ridiculous and just humble, the best. I could not have loved Blayne more. I could not have admired him more. I cherished every moment with him, whether it be in crowded meetings, sold-out concerts, or long one-on-one phone conversations trying to figure humans out. He was better at it. I would love to be as good at it as he was. His heart was filled with appreciation for those he understood and those he didn't, and his respect for them and for us all was immense, and it was beyond mutual. I'm so grateful to call Blayne my friend. It's one of the highest honors of my life. But I must be honest with you and say that I'm a greedy person. And I wanted him to be here for all of my days. I don't always get my wish. I'll finish by telling you the last concert I saw with Blayne was none other than Bob Dylan. What a memorable night that was. And so I'll end with 2 Bob Dylan lyrics. He was a friend of mine. Every time I hear his name, I just can't keep from crying because he was a friend of mine. But Dylan also sang, just remember that death is not the end. So I will hold the priceless memories I have of Blayne forever, so it will not be the end. He will be with me always, just like he'll be with you all always. As Blayne said, because we were one, all love.
First, I want to thank Blayne's family, his friends, and the community of San Antonio for inviting us all here to do this with you. We met, of course, through an improbable, nearly impossible mission to save our stages in the trenches, during a lonely time, scattered around the country, total strangers united by a common goal, and many, many late-night conversations. We became kindred spirits quickly, simply due to the unlikely situation that bound us and the time we were in. Blayne was at the center of that universe, and Blayne, of course, touched on it best with these words, and he said, I've said it before to some of you, but it's ironic how close we've emotionally bonded, in part related to how far apart we're geographically positioned. There's a dark side to this business of which we all are aware, monolithic in its most obvious state. Yet we hail from the side that cares too much. If that's a fault, I think we'll take it. Know this, I can't remember a life without you all. Whether we've exchanged a word in person or not, each and every one of you could call on me to do whatever you needed, and I will be there in an instant, ready to do the dirtiest of work without question. Blayne was truly one of a kind, his heart bigger than the entire state of Texas. Blayne was devoted to sticking up for the little guy. His love for his family, friends, community, for music, for the arts, truly inspiring. In his life, he consistently gave of himself. He helped people in trouble and gave to those around him. It was that state of mind and that belief that would become the ethos, the heart and soul, and the pulse of Detour. He truly believed that a rising tide lifts all ships, that if we increase everyone's opportunities, if we give a hand up, if we use our collective independence and leverage that, then we will be much stronger together, and we can guide an evolution of this industry that strengthens independence, helps build up weaker markets, and helps artists develop on stages inside those communities owned by small business owners and young entrepreneurs. He was incredibly passionate about it. It was and is still contagious, and it will always be. His words were prolific and prophetic and profound. Sometimes I'd read his words in emails and in texts, and it would be so beautiful, I'd be moved to tears. And then I would have to pull out my Merriam-Webster dictionary to make sure I understood what he was talking about. That happened a lot. He was a lot smarter than I ever was. Blayne was a true wordsmith. I know I speak for everyone when I say that Blayne Tucker made you want to be a better person. He seldom had to push you to do that. He showed it by example. And because of that, you simply wanted to do and be better. And again, he was just one of a kind. So I want to leave you with one more of his quotes that I've read often since he has left us in this physical world. He said, "You can't be stuck in a glass half empty mindset. Revolution and reform is almost always preceded by repeated attempts at change that fail. Our lives, short as they are, lack the perspective to fully understand that we don't do for today, but merely offer some hope for tomorrow." Blayne, my brother, I love you and I miss you dearly. We all do. And I can't see that hurt and longing to be able to strategize with you, to dare to dream with you, to laugh with you, to cry with you, to hug you. I can't see that ever going away, but I am going to try and keep this glass half full. So as Blayne would have wanted, I just say on behalf of my Detour brothers and sisters, as well as our entire Save Our Stages family, that we are incredibly blessed to be here with all of you today. We are humbled and honored for this inclusion, to grieve with you, to commiserate with you, to celebrate Blayne with you, and to keep his legacy alive for generations to come so that together we can all offer hope for tomorrow. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Valerie. I'm Blaine's youngest sister. 29 years ago, I was getting ready to make my entrance into the world, and from what I hear, almost everyone was excited to meet me, except one person. My at the time 14-year-old brother was mortified that his mom was pregnant and told his parents that he wouldn't be able to face anyone at school because everyone would know what his mom had been doing. So in typical Blayne fashion, he refused to come to the hospital to greet me upon arrival. But exactly one day later, he miraculously recovered from the embarrassment of having a sister 14 years younger, and we were thick as thieves ever since. In my early days, he could be found changing my diapers, putting bows in my hair, and hauling me around to his friends' houses. As a pitcher in high school, you might see him leave the mound to kiss me through the chain link fence as I cheered on my Bubba from the bleachers. After he graduated from high school, we moved to Las Vegas, where Blayne attended UNLV, and I began kindergarten. When we lived in Las Vegas, I trained myself to wake up around 3 in the morning so I could catch a rare glimpse of my brother creeping in after a night out, and I would run to his bed to snuggle with him. Somehow, my brother, the overachiever, who never slept, and partied every single night, still managed to graduate with a bachelor's degree in hospitality administration in only 2 years. He would hang that little victory over my head during all of my college years and call me at the start of every semester just to ask me what was taking so long. After we left Nevada, we moved to Grapevine, where Blayne went on to study law at Texas Wesleyan University, which he also completed in 3 years. One of my favorite memories during this time was playing restaurant with Blayne, who worked at Red Lobster, probably a very little known fact. And we would play restaurant together when he got off. A lot of times you could find him in his bedroom, locked in, studying his law school books. My cousins, Trey, Drake, and I would typically knock on the door obnoxiously or run to his room and shut the book because irritating Blayne was one of our favorite hobbies. And I would get away with everything, but they never did. He would threaten them with wedgies, and I specifically remember him hanging Trey by his underwear on the stair banister for the ultimate wedgie. Thankfully, Blayne went on to have almost a dozen nieces, so the wedgie punishment stopped with Trey and Drake. One of the hardest things I've had to do is to write a tribute for my only brother. But in writing something so emotional, I realized if I could give everyone in this room one thing, it would be the gift of a brother like mine. He was the protector I would climb in bed with when I had nightmares, the first person I called the moment I got into trouble, the advisor that picked my major and every college class I took. He was the most passionate, creative, brilliant, irritating, hilarious person on the planet. He reoriented all of us to live a life filled with purpose and adventure. And he was at his happiest when he was traveling, visiting new places, listening to music, making an impact on his community, cooking, and of course, eating. He was a fierce defender of justice and didn't let anyone or anything stand in the way of doing what was right. His devotion to his family, friends, and community was the foundation of his actions and the anchor that defined and shaped his life. I love you, Blayne, and you make me so proud. Thank you for being my big brother. I'll miss you every second of every day for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Blayne's Aunt Ann, and Blayne was the oldest of my nieces and nephews. And, it wasn't long, let me start over. Blayne was the oldest of my nieces and nephews, and I was just a teenager when he was born, so I had the blessing of having a lot of quality time with Blayne and Shelby. It didn't take me long to figure out how brilliant Blayne was, and one of the examples I can share is Blayne was 8 years old, and I was in town, and Blayne, Shelby, and I went to SeaWorld. And we were on our way home, and a thunderstorm came out of nowhere, and it was blinding rain, and I couldn't see where I was going, and I couldn't figure out how to turn the windshield wipers on. So I asked Blayne how to do it. And of course, he's 8 years old and didn't know what to tell me. And I said, well, you need to think really hard. Where would your daddy put his hand when he would reach over to turn on the windshield wipers? And he thought about it, and he told me what to do. About 3 years ago, Blayne came to visit me in Minneapolis, and he had a list of things he wanted to do while he was there. And several of the things were to visit art museums, and his art knowledge and art history and art appreciation, he taught me so much that day. And the other place he wanted to go was Paisley Park. And those of you that don't know what that was Prince's home and recording studio. And before we went, he told me that he was actually working with Prince to arrange for a recording, but Prince passed away right before that was going to happen. And so during the tour, I was waiting for him to tell him that he actually knew Prince, but he was just the humble Blayne that he is and kept it all to himself. So a year ago Christmas, we had the pleasure of Blayne coming and spending the holiday with us. And he asked if it would be okay if he he prepared the crab legs and he wanted to make his famous rolls. So I kid you not, every surface of my kitchen had either butter, flour, or both. But it was, the mess was well worth it because that was one of the best meals I have ever had. So after dinner, we were having a glass of wine, waiting for the time to go to church for the Christmas Eve service. And for those of you who've been around him, I'm sure you've had this happen, but in the middle of the conversation, he would fall asleep and start snoring. And that kept happening with that glass of wine in his hand. I was sure I was going to have it all over my house, but he managed to wake himself up and didn't spill a drop. So then we got to church. My daughter-in-law had gone ahead to save us a seat, and when we got there, she had saved the very front pew. And it was a huge, old, historical church, and we're in the front pew. Not only that, is Blaine and I were in the direct line of vision of the pastor, directly in front of him. And shortly into the service, his head started bobbing. And I was mortified to think he was gonna have that snoring. And so every time his head would bob, I would elbow him. And so after church, he said, "Were you elbowing me?" I said, "Yes, you were falling asleep." And he said, "No, I wasn't. I was meditating to the music." So there you go, another genre of music that he enjoyed. Blaine's grandfather, my father's favorite Bible reading was the 23rd Psalm. And in that psalm, it tells us that the Lord is preparing a table for us in heaven and that our cup should runneth over. So Blayne, I would like crab legs, your famous rolls, and an overflowing glass of wine when I get to that table. I love you and I miss you.
Well, I've prepared a brief 1-hour sermon on I was there the day that Blayne was born, along with obviously Tom and my mom. And Blayne was like my first child. I'm his Uncle Osi because he couldn't say Lewis. So I became Osi. So if you've ever heard him talk about Osi, that is me. And it was so nice for me when he was born because all of a sudden as an 18-year-old, I had the opportunity to have a child where I could go to an amusement park or a fair or a carnival or a water park and go, hey, it's my kid. I might look young, but I had carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. And it was just amazing, all the adventures that we had over the years. And the most recent adventures during the pandemic. And sometimes when you're wondering, with the pandemic, especially the stuff with Neva and this amazing thing that happened and the time that it brought both of my boys here to San Antonio to be with Blayne. And when I found out that Linda and I were having our first child, Blayne goes, "Oh, O.C., you're in trouble. I'm gonna teach them everything I know." And I was like, I couldn't ask for anything more. And I hope he got it all in because I'm so blessed to have had him in my life. And there's very few people that you live through your entire life, and I can't think of a single argument, a single crossword, or disagreement we had about anything, which is amazing when you think about it. Other than if you talk about the game that we played over Thanksgiving, where every time, and I can't even remember what that silly game was, but if you said a certain word, you had to buzz. And so it didn't matter, as soon as I started talking, he would go, beep, 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 beep. And I started doing him, and that was probably about as irritated as we ever were at each other. But it was amazing that Blayne could make friends with anyone, and he was so humble. You know, tomorrow's the Super Bowl, and Blayne, I found out, and I go, Blayne, you went to the Super Bowl? And it was the Super Bowl, I think it was Brady's first win against the Rams down in New Orleans. And he goes, yeah. And I go, well, you know, you weren't going to tell me about that? And he goes, well, yeah. And I go, well, like, who was there? And he goes, well, it was Outkast. The guys from Outkast invited me, and they were just coming on the scene. And I go, well, like, who else? And he goes, well, Chris was there. And I go, who, Chris? Well, Ludacris? And I was like, so all these little details, but he was just so humble and everything. And he was a quiet worker who did the work day in and day out and showed love and kindness to everyone. Sitting in the bar in the Old Pink in Buffalo, and him talking and having like a quorum of the locals here at this bar, and you could imagine what the Old Pink was. And I highly recommend it if you get to Buffalo and you have to go during a blizzard, so Blayne can wear his shashuka hat in the snow with no gloves. And it was just amazing that I go, are these people with Neva or? And he goes, no, I just met them, you know. And he knew everything about them. But I mean, I loved him so much. And one of the most things that I couldn't believe was that when all of this was the preparation for this, there was a call out for pictures and videos. And my birthday was on the 6th of January. It used to be known as the Epiphany. Now it's sort of Insurrection Day, but that's another story. But my youngest, for all of our family, sends out a birthday notice. You always get it at like 12:01. You know, happy birthday, I love you. And I had looked everywhere for all of these pictures. That Blayne and I had a trip to Taos, and I couldn't find any of them. And we had had such a good time, and it was just he and I got to meet some amazing Neva people, Jason and Tanya up in Taos, and they were just incredible. But I couldn't find any of these pictures, and I can remember us hiking up on top of this plateau and looking, and he was going like, this is my church. This is just amazing to be up here and watch this. And I go, yes, it's my church as well. But his church is also his friends, his family, his loved ones, the people that he cared about so much. He was a maverick in many, many ways. But going back to looking for those pictures, when I read my little notice from Drake, and then I look up at the top and there's a picture up there. And it's it's the Google sort of combination, and I could not find any of the pictures. I looked for all of the days, and there's the whole video of our entire trip together. And there was a song playing, and the song saying like, a love like ours will keep rolling along. And it was his way of telling me, happy birthday, Ozzy. You'll be okay, and we'll be okay. And in my life, I hope we all become mavericks in Blayne's honor and do the unconventional things to show love and kindness to everyone and the underdog. I love you and I miss you. We'll see you.
What a beautiful building to be able to speak to you all. I want to preface it sort of by saying, actually just forgot what I was going to say. How interesting and somewhat ironic it is that you find out more about somebody after their passing than you know about them during their life. No two people can really know another human in the same way. And really, how much can you even know another person when most people at the same time are struggling just to figure out themselves? So I'm an interesting choice for this. I've not spent a lot of time with Blayne in our lives. So what I'm sharing is personal to me. This is how Blayne showed up. This is what he reflected in me. And this is how I choose to remember him. Now, on the Tucker side, I'm the blood cousin closest in age to Blayne. Now, since leading our very different lives in states far away, we've only shared a handful of visits in our adult lives, most of them occurring during the past 3 years. Now, despite that, I've certainly viewed Blayne as one of my favorite people. He was a real dude. He was a good person, but not a do-gooder, and I mean that as a compliment. And we understood each other. We couldn't be more different in lifestyle, but when it comes to personality and the things that matter, we are very uniquely similar. Now, this doesn't necessarily make me unique, since Blayne's well known for his easygoing demeanor and ability to connect with people of all kinds. It's more of a statement about my admiration and respect for this person, and the rarity it is to find someone else that shares that similar level of skepticism for the world we are programmed into, let alone my closest cousin. I'll forever be grateful that he made the effort over the past few years to come and visit me and my family in North Carolina. All that, each time it was extremely genuine and was always followed up with a very heartfelt, well-written response, sort of a take-home of like, what did we learn during this visit? What was meaningful about it? My wife reminded me recently of the first time that they met. She picked him up from the airport in Greensboro and had to drop him off at my in-laws to spend, they lived next to the airport before she brought him to the farm. And he spent 45 minutes with my father-in-law. And after the trip, he was with us for a few days. He wrote a several page long, incredible letter to him, sort of talking about the impression that he made and just the admiration that he had. And that's just like, who does that kind of stuff? And who knows how long it took him to write that? We all know how well written he was. So personally, what do I admire around Blayne? Well, for me, he was very well read in the darker, lesser known parts of modern history. Government underlyings, geopolitical happenings, things that aren't really part of the narrative, the controlled narrative that we're taught. However, our last conversation that we had together was after a music festival in Raleigh. It was over a gin martini nightcap. He had treated my wife and I to this music festival hotel room. And, that conversation had a lot to do with Alan Dulles and the shady underlyings of the CIA, stuff that I had just finished reading a book about it, but he could still add so much information that I was unaware of. So that impressed me. Really, not that, so some people, he had a sort of academic, objective, emotionally detached way of knowing this information. These are, these darker, uncomfortable topics. No fear, anger, anxiety, hopelessness. It just is what it is. It's both real, but it's also not real. And that's the important part. He was able to acknowledge the illusion of the world, yet still put a lot of effort into improving it. And maybe this was just part of his humility, and I've underscored that, as other people have, and demeanor. But it was also rare to discuss a topic where he didn't have something intelligent or witty to offer. He'll always surprise you. Some people work really hard at spiritual truth-seeking and studying metaphysics to achieve this perception or insight that sort of came natural to Blayne. The veil of illusion seemed to fall naturally for him. And I can't nor wouldn't speak of the specific experiences that may have led to some of Blayne's wisdom, although I doubt he spent too much time sitting around trying to meditate. Blayne lived a life on his terms. And from my perspective, he created the life that he wanted and seemed to master most aspects of that. I can't speak for the higher consciousness lessons that he was supposed to learn in this lifetime, but my secondary reaction upon hearing of his passing, following shock and sadness, of course, is that he may have learned what he needed to and his soul decided it was time to move on to another trip, even if his ego was still attached to this life. I was also a little bit in awe that this contemporary of mine was already part of this great mystery. During one of his visits to North Carolina, I remember making the comment that, it's like, you only got one foot in the door here. He didn't disagree, but insinuated some recent experiences that really opened a window into the next realm. And I don't mean to be insensitive to the loss and suffering of his close friends and family, or the different views of others. I'm only speaking from a similar perspective to Blayne's regarding life, death, how the universe works, and our purpose in it. There is no end to Blayne, and he is possibly more part of us now than he ever was alive. He was not without his struggles and imperfections, but he knew how to be a good human. What did he model? Enjoy life. Don't take it too serious. Acknowledge that people and relationships are important. Look out for the needs of others, since we are one family. And when you are called to action, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, be tenacious, get it done, and do it well. During our last visit this past fall, I asked him what motivates him in life, and his response was just to help connect people with each other. He certainly accomplished this through his professional work, business, devotion to friends and family, and his genuine interest in new people that he met. For me personally, it was live music where I first experienced the collective consciousness among a room full of strangers. This is something that Blayne obviously devoted much of his life towards supporting. What a joyous and purposeful way to pursue this goal. A piece of wisdom that I've taken to heart during my adult life is the assertion that you can't judge the success of a relationship by its length. Sometimes personal and universal truths can be revealed during a short conversation with a stranger, and you don't need to live to 80 to have a meaningful existence and a lasting impact on others. Life itself is a paradox and is ruled by many other paradoxes. You don't need others to realize truth, but without others, you are relatively nothing. The downside of being such an influential being is that your departure leaves a greater void in the hearts and lives of those who you're part of. One of Blayne's quotes that stood out to me is as follows: "The relationships among us flow perpetually, division only imagined by this false sense of space between one another, as we are one unified field." Thank you, cuz, for loving me and being you. And thank you all for letting me share these words.
Thank all of you for being here, for Blayne, and for all of us. I'm truly grateful. On December the 29th, in the evening, I received a text. It says, "I love you, Mommy. See you soon." He was supposed to arrive at 11 o'clock the following morning. I heard the door open, and I raced to see him. But what I saw was my beautiful daughter on her wedding, crying. She wanted me to sit down. I didn't want to sit down. I said, "What's wrong?" Her mind jumps to everything. And after a few moments, I said, "What is it?" And she says, "Bubba is gone." And I was thinking, gone where? Did he go on a trip? What happened? You have a lot of ideas about your child, your hope for the future, what you envision, but you never are prepared for your child to die before you do. Valerie wanted to cancel the wedding, and I told her we can't do that. your brother would be furious, and I don't think either one of us want to be haunted by him. So we figured out a way to pull it together, and I felt his strength. We felt him that day, and somehow we managed to get through the day. Philip and Marlene were there when I first learned that he had died, and I'm so thankful for that. Somehow we managed to have a beautiful wedding. But don't ever take for granted that you're going to do something tomorrow or soon, because it may not happen. So just cherish each moment that you have, the people that you love. And I've heard all of these stories about Blayne and just how easygoing he was. I'm here to tell you, that's not true. I'm glad he could behave for other people. But I can tell you my baby was fierce. And as he was growing up, I was tasked with the duty of pulling him in if he was a little afraid. I didn't want to, because I knew I would be met with ferocity. But I always called it my quarterly exorcism, because he internalized so much, and there was so much inside of him that he would blow up. And I'm sure that comes as a big surprise to all of y'all. I want to thank Neva, Save the Stages, all of you who sent me so much love, the love letters about my beautiful child, and shared his expressions of love towards me. It meant more than you will ever know. And Craig, his best friend since he was 6 years old, I want to thank you for giving us another 20 years with Blayne, because he came near death when they were hiking and got lost. Of course, Blayne was a little agitated with Craig because he had just gotten out of ranger school and felt like Craig should know where they were. So he perched on a rock and couldn't talk to Craig for a period of time. But Craig raced down that mountain and got Blayne the help he needed to rescue him and fly to the hospital. Then he got mad at Craig again because Blayne, I think, had spent $30 on a bus ticket. And Craig decided after their big adventure that he wanted to fly home. And Blayne was not about to lose that $30 on the bus trip all the way back from Montana, where he stopped 30 times. I was so worried about him that I called the bus stations because I was trying to track where the stops were. And in Denver, I got a hold of the station master and I said, my son's in trouble. He was in the hospital and I think you need to go look for him. And he goes, lady, how old is your son? I said, he's 24. He said, lady, you need to let go. When he arrived, I picked him up at the bus station, and his feet were swollen. He had his glasses on. And I said, I can't believe you wouldn't get a hold of me when you know how worried I was. I was afraid a serial killer got a hold of you. And he said, Mommy, they thought I was the serial killer. So, as most of you know, that Blayne didn't want or like to sleep. And when he was a baby, I didn't know much about children. I had never been a babysitter. I'd never been around. And Tommy and I lived in New York, so Blayne and I were together most of the day. And we would have our adventures. And I taught him all of these nursery rhymes, which he could recite just on point. Okay, do this, Jack Sprat. And he'd go into it. And when it was time for him to go to bed, Tommy and I would say, "You got to go to bed." And he goes, "I don't have to go to bed. I'm going to knock the dark over. I am not going to bed." But he had his own special brand of fashion and his own private collection of cologne. And y'all know what I'm talking about. So one time after he got out of law school, we worked together. He said I was his assistant, but I think it was the other way around. And we went to the courthouse for a hearing. And after he got out of the courthouse, he says, "Hey, we have time to go to the museum. Let's go to the Conspiracy Museum." I said, "Okay." So we went over to the Conspiracy in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, and we walked around, and he was getting obsessed with, he'd see, "You see this? This is a ticket, Lee Harvey Oswald going to Cuba. Look at this, this is," and we're immersed in the event. And Blayne, I said, "Hey, honey, they're gonna close the doors here, we gotta go." And somehow he drifted off someplace to the back of the museum. And I walked out the front door because they're saying it's time to go. So I walked out the front door thinking he was gonna be out the front door, and I couldn't find him. And I see these locking, and I'm going, what's going on here? So the next thing I see is my son is banging on the windows like this. And I'm standing outside laughing because no one was left in the museum. He could not get out. And I was laughing, and he's going mad at me. And I just stood there looking at him, and I said, 911? You want me to call 911? And he was so embarrassed. We had to call the police, who had to call the museum, who had to unlock him. And he said, the police officer said, "What were you here for?" And I said, "He was at a hearing. He's a lawyer. He got locked in the museum." Blayne rejected the notion that he should be constrained by any particular religiosity. He embraced all of the brilliant philosophies from Taoism, Buddhism. It wasn't a religion, it was a philosophy. And he read up on those things. He knew them by heart. And he embraced different people with different faiths, different religions, and no mother could ever be more proud than to have a child who loved, accepted, and embraced the dispossessed, the hurt, the hungry. That's what I wanted for him. That's what I expected from him, and he delivered. I have thought a lot about what I wanted to say, because he would have expected me, number one, to come here with my makeup on well, even though he had a different level of expectation for himself. He didn't want me to have gray roots. He didn't want me to age gracefully. He expected me to look a certain way, and he expects me to deliver to you his message in a way that would bring him joy and pride. And I'm reminded, for those of you who knew Viktor Frankl, from the great neurologist and psychiatrist who was locked in the Holocaust, Auschwitz, for many years, separated from his wife and family. And he wrote a manuscript describing how we are to seek an effort to survive past our suffering, that we can learn how to suffer. And I'm here today to tell you, if I can stand up here and talk to you, that you can survive anything. And I want to share a poem that is so much representative of my beautiful child. It says, it's by Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet and writer. He said, "Speak to us of children. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable." I've written a poem that I think is what Blayne would want me to share with you. My family, my friends, please grieve for me not. You're wondering now if you may have forgotten to speak all the love left unsaid in your heart. Unspoken you fear, I may not have known all the love deep inside you. Now you're alone, aching for moments, just one last embrace. Reflections of love I've seen on each face. My loved ones, my missions, and even the strife are remnants of me in a wonderful life, full of joy, sometimes pain, but certainly much giving. March on and remember, through you I keep living. Some evenings my absence may kindle despair, but you have to believe that I know that you care. Cling now and trust the Lord and his wisdom. He'll comfort your souls, the pain and its prison. A mother once screamed, "Why?" when her child died at birth. But God, in omnipotent grace, spoke these words. Before coming to heaven, all my angels touch earth. Thank you. My darling Justin Cantor, he wrote me and asked me to choose a selection for Blayne that was a reflection of this particular moment, which is written by Camille Saint-Saëns, called Le Seigneur. And it is about the beautiful swan in fabled mythology that was mute until its last moments, where it sang the most beautiful song. And thank you, Justin, for sending that message to me.
shared today. So beautiful, beautiful comments. So I just have a few closing just reflections and thoughts that I'd like to share. So one of the things I think about is as we hear these stories of not only we hear these stories of love and of grace and of hope and of passion. I don't know about you, but it really makes me long, makes me a little bit homesick for a land, for a kingdom, for a time, for a place where these things are the everyday. And I'll tell you, I loved hearing the stories today, not only about Blayne's kind and tender side, but of his tenacious side and his spunky side. That's what made him so good. That's what made him such an agent of change in this world. And I love it. And so, hope you'll indulge me. I'm going to read a quote today. I'm a bit of a Lord of the Rings fan. And one of the things I like about it is that Lord of the Rings is about this journey. And there's a lot of difficult and dark things happening. And there's so many parallels to life. And in this particular quote, Frodo is on this journey into this land of darkness, and his good friend Samwise Gamgee is beside him. And Frodo's really ready to give up because of the darkness and the difficulty of the things going on, which, I don't know about you, but this world can be really tough sometimes. And there's times I'm thinking, gosh, how do we go on? And this is what this quote says by Tolkien. It's like the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad has happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. I now know folks in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. And I think about the fact that Tom DeGeorge shared earlier. He said that, Blayne was talking about, hey, there's a dark side to this business. But what I got from that is there's a dark side to the music business, but care and love is more powerful. And we saw that with the way so many folks in this room have created so many opportunities and been agents of change and done so much good for the music industry, which has benefited individuals and communities and families, and it's been so beautiful. So I met a lady a few years ago. She's a pastor out of the Seattle area, and she told me that she was at this Bible study one time. And at the Bible study, they were talking about the story of the resurrection of Lazarus, where he came back from the dead. And someone in that study very authentically asked, okay, wait. Have you really ever seen someone come back to life? And this Pastor Laura stopped. She said, I have. Whenever grace is offered, when grace is not expected, there's a part of someone that comes back to life. When someone is forgiven at a time when they felt like maybe they don't deserve it, there's a part of them that comes back to life. When someone is offered hope at a time of despair, there's a part of them that comes back to life. And I think that's beautiful because there's a part of us that's resurrected in moments like this. And some of you might be familiar with out of the Christian scriptures in John 11:25, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though he dies. And as we talked about today, Audrey mentioned the quote of Bob Dylan, death is not the end. And so as we talked about at the beginning about today, this place, this moment is sacred and it's a thin place. Let's be a thin place in this world. Let's honor Blayne in that way. Let's be a place where the values of heaven come to earth. Let's be a place where light shines in the darkness. Let's be a source of hope and creativity and tenacity and kindness and wisdom. Let's live like Blayne. Let's have shared adventures together. Let's share deep relationships. Let's cherish every moment. Let's speak the unsaid love in our hearts. Let's be passionate. Let's be creative. God has given each one of us unique gifts. And sometimes those gifts to speak light into the darkness do require us to be tenacious and fierce, and that's good. But let's leave a lasting legacy. Let's be fully alive, because in the end, love wins. Love will have the final word. And Blayne's life was a testimony to that. The words shared, the memories, the stories were a testimony to that. So thanks be to God. Thank you for being here today. And the family wants to invite each and every one of you to just step right outside to this reception. We're going to have a lot of fun and enjoy the beautiful day and enjoy being together. So thank you.